The crystal glass sweats against the starch-stiff white tablecloth, leaving a damp ring that mirrors the cold, heavy pit rapidly expanding in Nadia's stomach. She watches Trent check his Rolex for the third time in 5 minutes, the gold glinting aggressively under the low, ambient chandeliers of Le Jardin. This dinner was supposed to be the celebration of their 3-year anniversary, but the air between them feels stagnant, heavy with unspoken words that threaten to choke her completely. She adjusts the hem of her thrifted blue dress, suddenly painfully aware of how the fabric has frayed slightly at the seam, contrasting sharply with the pristine, high society world Trent so desperately craves. The clinking of expensive silverware around them sounds like jagged applause, mocking her naivety as Trent finally clears his throat, his eyes sliding away from hers to fixate on a point over her shoulder. The silence stretches, brittle and sharp, until it finally snaps. Nadia, we need to be realistic about where this is going, because I don't think we are aligning anymore, Trent says, his voice devoid of the warmth she used to rely on when the city felt too big and lonely. He picks up his wine, swirling the dark red liquid without drinking it, a nervous tic she knows too well. I'm moving up at the firm, and my life is changing in ways that require a certain partner who understands that world. Nadia feels the blood drain from her face, her fingers gripping the napkin in her lap until her knuckles turn white. It isn't just a breakup. It is a dismissal, a corporate restructuring of his personal life where she is the redundant asset. She tries to speak, to ask why he is doing this here, in public, but her throat has closed up tight, trapping her voice behind a wall of rising panic. I don't understand. Trent, we were talking about moving in together just last week, she finally manages to whisper, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to remain composed in the face of his cruelty. Trent sighs, a sound of impatience rather than empathy, and sets his glass down with a sharp clack that draws the attention of the couple at the next table. Things change, Nadia. I've changed. And honestly, I've met someone who challenges me, someone who fits into the future I'm building. The words land like physical blows, knocking the wind out of her lungs. Before she can process the admission, a hand rests on Trent's shoulder, a hand with a perfectly manicured French tip and a diamond bracelet that catches the light. Nadia looks up, her heart hammering against her ribs, and locks eyes with Chloe, her supposed best friend since college, who is smiling a smile that doesn't reach her cold eyes. The betrayal is a physical sensation, a wave of nausea that rolls through her gut as Chloe slides into the booth next to Trent, interlacing her fingers with his. I'm sorry you had to find out like this, sweetie, Chloe says, her tone dripping with a faux sympathy that makes Nadia want to scream. But Trent and I we couldn't fight the chemistry anymore. It wouldn't be fair to you to keep lying. The room seems to tilt on its axis. The hum of conversation in the restaurant roars in Nadia's ears, drowning out the soft jazz playing in the background. She looks from Trent, who refuses to meet her gaze, to Chloe, who looks triumphant. They aren't just breaking her heart, they are erasing her, humiliating her in the most thorough way possible. She stands up, her legs shaking so badly she almost knocks over her chair, and the sound echoes like a gunshot. Nadia stumbles out of the restaurant, the heavy oak doors closing behind her to mute the warmth and light of the world she has just been expelled from. The city air is biting and cold, carrying the scent of impending rain and exhaust fumes that sting her eyes. She walks without direction, her heels clicking an uneven rhythm on the pavement, tears finally spilling over to track hot lines down her frozen cheeks. Every happy couple she passes feels like a personal affront, a reminder of what she just lost, and the fool she was to believe in it. She thought Trent was her future, her safety in a chaotic world, but he was just a climber, using her as a placeholder until he found a better rung on the ladder. She clutches her purse to her chest, feeling small and invisible, swallowed whole by the towering skyscrapers of the city that suddenly feels like a prison. Her apartment is a stark contrast to Le Jardin, a fourth-floor walk-up with peeling paint and a radiator that clanks like a dying engine. She kicks off her shoes, leaving them in the middle of the narrow hallway, and heads straight for the kitchen, her movements jerky and fueled by a volatile mix of rage and despair. She finds a bottle of cheap red wine, half empty from a week ago, and doesn't bother with a glass, taking a long pull straight from the bottle. The liquid burns her throat, a grounding sensation that cuts through the numbness spreading in her chest. She collapses onto her lumpy sofa, the springs digging into her back, and pulls out her phone. Social media is already flooded with a picture Chloe posted. Her and Trent toasting with champagne. Caption, "Finally where I belong." The screen blurs as fresh tears well up, hot and blinding. The rage hits her then, sudden and volcanic, obliterating the sadness and replacing it with a desire to burn the world down. She opens her contacts, her thumbs flying across the cracked screen of her phone, clumsy with wine and fury. She selects a mass group, or what she thinks is a mass group, and types with aggressive force. All men are trash. Every single one. You take and you leave nothing but wreckage behind. I hope you all rot. She hits send before her brain can catch up with her fingers, the little whoosh sound of the message delivering feeling weirdly satisfying. She takes another long drink of wine, the bottle nearly empty now, and lets the phone drop to the floor. The room spins lazily. She closes her eyes, the darkness swallowing her, and falls into a restless, alcohol-fueled sleep, completely unaware that she typed a digit wrong. Sunlight slices through the thin curtains like a razor blade, waking Nadia with a headache that throbs in time with her heartbeat. Her mouth tastes like stale grapes and regret, and for a glorious, fleeting second, she forgets. Then, the memory of the restaurant, Trent's dismissal, and Chloe's smirk crashes down on her, pressing her into the mattress. She groans, rolling over to find her phone on the floor, dread pooling in her stomach as she remembers the text. She prays it didn't go through, or that she just sent it to her mom by accident. She unlocks the screen, squinting against the brightness, and sees the message thread. It wasn't a mass text. It was a single message sent to a number she doesn't recognize. And there is a reply. A single notification bubble sits there, innocent and terrifying. She swallows hard, her throat dry, and taps the screen to open it. The message from the unknown number is short, precise, and sends a shiver skittering down her spine that has nothing to do with the cold apartment. I'll show you what a real man looks like. Meet me tomorrow at the Obsidian, 9 p.m. Come alone. D. Nadia stares at the screen, blinking rapidly to make sure she isn't hallucinating. Who is D? Is this a wrong number prank? A creep who got lucky? Or did she accidentally text someone she knows? She checks the number again. The area code is local, but she definitely doesn't have this contact saved. A sensible person would delete the thread and block the number. A sensible person would curl up in bed and cry over her ex. But Nadia isn't feeling sensible today. She is feeling reckless, hollowed out, and possessed by a dangerous curiosity that feels like the only spark of life left in her charred soul. She spends the day in a haze, oscillating between manic energy and crushing depression, but the mysterious text acts as an anchor. It's a distraction, a puzzle to solve that keeps her from obsessing over Trent's betrayal. By the time evening rolls around, the curiosity has hardened into resolve. She puts on her armor, a black dress she bought for a gallery opening she never went to, sleek and fitting in all the right places, and applies lipstick the color of dried blood. The Obsidian is a place she has only heard rumors about, an exclusive underground club in the meatpacking district where the city's elite go to sin in private. If this is a joke, she will turn around and leave. If it's a creep, she has her pepper spray. but a tiny, treacherous part of her hopes it's something else entirely. Something that will make her forget Tren exists. The obsidian is an imposing structure of black brick and steel, lacking any signage save for a small, dark emblem above the heavy iron door. A line of hopefuls stretches down the block, shivering in the cold, but the bouncer, a mountain of a man with a headset, seems to be waiting for her. When she approaches, heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs, she simply holds up her phone showing the text. The bouncer's eyes widen imperceptibly. He nods, unhooking the velvet rope and stepping aside. "Mr. Sterling is expecting you on the top level," he rumbles, his voice like gravel. "Sterling?" The name rings a bell, distant and ominous, but she can't place it. She steps inside, and the bass of the music hits her chest like a physical force, the air thick with the scent of expensive cologne, ozone, and danger. The club is a labyrinth of shadows and flashing lights, bodies moving in a synchronized, hedonistic rhythm on the dance floor below. Nadia is led up a floating glass staircase by a hostess who looks like she walked off a runway, her expression blank and professional. They ascend above the chaos, the noise dampening as they reach the VIP level, which is encased in soundproof glass overlooking the madness. The hostess stops at the end of a long corridor, gesturing toward a pair of double mahogany doors. "He is inside," she says simply, before turning and walking away. Nadia stands alone in the hallway. Her hands are trembling. This is insane. She should leave. But the anger from last night flares up again. The need to prove she isn't just a victim. She pushes the doors open and steps into the lion's den. The room is vast, dimly lit by amber sconces, smelling of leather and aged scotch. A fire crackles in a modern hearth, casting long, dancing shadows against walls lined with books that look older than the country itself. In the center of the room, sitting on a tufted leather sofa with the casual grace of a predator at rest, is a man. He is looking at a tablet, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. When the door clicks shut, he looks up. The air leaves the room. He is devastating. Dark hair swept back, sharp cheekbones that could cut glass, and eyes that are a startling, icy gray. He wears a suit that costs more than her life's earnings, the jacket discarded, shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and inked with intricate, dark tattoos. This is Reese Sterling. The Reese Sterling. He doesn't smile. He doesn't stand up immediately. He just watches her, his gaze heavy and tactile, tracing the line of her throat, the pulse fluttering there, the hem of her dress, and finally meeting her eyes with an intensity that makes her knees weak. "You came," he says, his voice a deep baritone that vibrates through the floorboards and settles in her core. "I admit, I wasn't sure you had the nerve." He sets the tablet down and stands, unfolding his height until he towers over the room. He moves toward her, not rushing, just closing the distance with terrifying inevitability. "I'm not a man who enjoys being ignored, Nadia," he says, and the use of her name, how does he know her name, sends a jolt of electricity through her. "But I am a man who appreciates a woman who speaks her mind, even if she is drunk when she does it." I didn't know it was you," Nadia manages to say, hating how breathless she sounds. She holds her ground, lifting her chin in defiance, refusing to be cowed by his overwhelming presence. "And I meant what I said. Men are trash. You haven't proven me wrong yet." A corner of his mouth quirks up, not quite a smile, but an acknowledgement of her spirit. He stops a foot away from her, close enough that she can smell the sandalwood and spice of him, close enough to see the faint white scar cutting through his left eyebrow. "Is that so?" Reese murmurs, looking down at her. "Then perhaps you've just been spending time with boys, Tesoro. Boys play games. They break things they don't understand." He takes a step closer, invading her personal space, his gray eyes darkening. "I don't play games, and I don't break things unless they need to be broken." "Why did you bring me here?" she asks, her voice gaining a little more strength, fueled by the adrenaline of proximity. "If you're so powerful, Surely you have better things to do than entertain a drunk dial. Reese chuckles, a low dark sound. He turns and walks to a wet bar, pouring a small amount of amber liquid into a crystal glass. Power is boring without amusement, Nadia. And you... He turns back, extending the glass to her. You are an anomaly. Most people in this city would cut off a finger before offending me. You insulted my entire gender to my personal line. She takes the glass, her fingers brushing his, and a spark snaps between them, sharp and hot. He doesn't pull away. I have a proposition for you, he says, his eyes locking onto hers. One that will solve your problem with that insect ex of yours and help me with a structural issue I have. Nadia stares at the amber liquid in her glass, the swirling vortex, reminding her of the chaos her life has become in less than 48 hours. I don't need help with my ex, she lies, the words tasting like ash, and I certainly don't need to get involved in whatever structural issues a man like you has. Reese leans back against the mahogany bar, crossing his arms over his chest, the muscles shifting beneath the fine cotton of his shirt. Don't you? He challenges softly. I know about the apartment, Nadia. I know about the debt your mother left you, and I know Trent is currently telling everyone in his circle, which includes your potential employers, that you're unstable. The blood drains from her face. The depth of his knowledge is terrifying. It isn't just research. It's an invasion. How? She whispers, the glass shaking in her hand. Information is currency, Reese says, his tone devoid of apology, and I am a very wealthy man. He pushes off the bar, moving to the window that overlooks the sprawling, glittering city. My problem is different. My business requires stability. Perception is reality in my world. My board, the heads of the families, believe I am too volatile, too untethered to lead the expansion into the West Coast. They want to see a settled man, a man with a wife. He turns back to her, the city lights framing his silhouette like a dark halo. I don't want a wife. I want a partner who can play a role, someone who hates men enough not to fall in love with me, but has enough fire to make it convincing. He pauses, letting the weight of the offer settle. Be my fiancé for 6 months. I clear your debts. I destroy Trent's reputation. Then we part ways. The proposition hangs in the air, audacious and insane. A fake engagement to a mafia boss? It sounds like the plot of a bad movie, yet the desperation clawing at her throat makes it sound like a lifeline. And if I say no? She asks, testing the boundaries of the cage he's building. Reese shrugs, a gesture of elegant indifference. Then, you walk out that door. You go back to your cold apartment. You watch Trent and his new girlfriend climb the social ladder while you struggle to pay rent. The choice is entirely yours. He takes a sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving her face. He knows he has won. He can smell the desperation on her, mixed with the defiance. He is offering her a weapon to fight back against a world that has kicked her while she was down. It is dangerous, yes, but being powerless is worse. I have conditions, Nadia says, her voice steadying. If she is going to sell her soul to the devil, she is going to negotiate the price. Reese raises an eyebrow, intrigued. I'm listening. She steps forward, placing the untouched drink on the table. No touching unless it's in public. I keep my job, or what's left of it, and Trent doesn't just lose his reputation. I want him to know it was me. I want him to know I won. A slow, predatory smile spreads across Reese's face, changing his entire demeanor from cold businessman to something far more lethal. Done, he says. He walks over to her, extending his hand. Welcome to the family, Tesoro. She hesitates for a fraction of a second, then places her hand in his. His grip is warm, firm, and calloused. As they shake on the deal, she feels the trap snap shut, but for the first time in days, she feels safe. The next morning feels like waking up on a different planet. The sunlight in Reese's penthouse hits differently than it does in her cramped apartment. Here, it filters through floor-to-ceiling glass, illuminating sleek Italian marble and modern art that probably costs more than her childhood home. Nadia sits on the edge of a bed that is too large, too soft, and definitely not hers. A maid had come in earlier, silently leaving a garment bag and a tray of coffee that smells like heaven. She opens the bag to find a dress, a structured ivory business piece that screams power and money. There is a note attached, written in sharp, angular handwriting. Wear this. We have a lunch meeting. Be ready at noon. Kale is waiting. R. It isn't a request. It is a command. And as much as she hates to admit it, the precision of it, the absolute control he wields, sends a thrill through her. The car ride to the restaurant is silent. Kyle, the driver who looks like he could snap a baseball bat in half with his bare hands, doesn't speak, but his eyes constantly flick to the rearview mirror, checking for threats. Nadia watches the city blur past, feeling a strange dissociation. Yesterday she was crying over a man who didn't love her. Today she is being chauffeured to a power lunch with a Mafia boss. They pull up to Aurelia, the most exclusive spot in Manhattan, a place Trent had been on a waiting list for 2 years to get into. The valet opens her door before the car even fully stops. She steps out, smoothing the ivory dress, and spots Reese waiting near the entrance. He is on the phone, looking impatient. But when he sees her, his expression shifts. He hangs up without saying goodbye, his eyes locking onto hers with a possessive heat that makes her breath hitch. You clean up well, Reese murmurs as she reaches him, his hand sliding onto the small of her back with an easy familiarity that feels shockingly natural. The heat of his palm seeps through the fabric of her dress, grounding her. For a fake fiancé, you look remarkably convincing. Nadia tilts her head, offering him a sharp smile. I aim to please, Mr. Sterling. Or should I call you darling? His eyes darken, a flash of amusement warring with something more primal. In public, you call me Reese, and you look at me like I am the center of your universe. Can you manage that? She steps closer, lowering her voice so only he can hear. I can act, Reese, but don't mistake the performance for reality. He leans down, his lips brushing her ear. The best lies always have a kernel of truth, Nadia. Don't forget that. Lunch is a performance art piece. They sit at the best table in the house, surrounded by senators, tech moguls, and socialites. Reese introduces her to an older man with cold eyes and a heavy Italian accent. Don Salvi. This is Nadia, Reese says, his hand resting protectively on her arm. The woman who finally convinced me to settle down. Salvi looks her up and down, searching for weakness, for fear. Nadia holds his gaze, keeping her chin high. It is a pleasure, she says, her voice steady. Reese has told me so much about you. It is a lie, of course, but she delivers it with perfect poise. Salvi laughs, a dry, rasping sound. She has fire, Reese. Good, you will need fire where you are going. He raises his glass. To the happy couple? As they clink glasses, Nadia sees Reese's jaw unclench slightly. She passed the first test, but the real test comes later that week. Reese takes her to a private gallery opening, a swirling vortex of champagne and gossip. She is separated from him for a moment, admiring a painting, when she feels a presence behind her. It isn't Reese. The smell of cheap cologne washes over her, triggering a wave of nausea. She turns to find Trent standing there, looking disheveled and desperate. Nadia, he hisses, grabbing her elbow. You have to talk to me. What are you doing with him? Do you have any idea who he is? She pulls her arm away, disgust roiling in her stomach. I know exactly who he is, Trent. He's the man who treats me like a queen, unlike the boy who treated me like a stepping stone. Trent's face twists in anger. He's a criminal, Nadia. He's dangerous, and you're just a pawn. Suddenly, the air pressure in the room seems to drop. A shadow falls over them. Trent freezes, his eyes widening in terror as he looks over Nadia's shoulder. She doesn't need to turn around to know who it is. She can feel him. The raw, radiating power of Reese Sterling wraps around her like a shield. Is this man bothering you, Amore? Reese's voice is soft. Deceptively so, like velvet wrapped around a razor blade. He steps up beside her, towering over Trent. Trent stammers, stepping back, nearly knocking over a sculpture. No, Mr. Sterling. We were just catching up. Reese smiles, but it is a smile that promises violence. Catching up? It looked like you were putting your hands on my fiancé, and I seem to recall telling you what happens when you disrespect what is mine. Reese's hand moves, almost too fast to track. He grips Trent's shoulder, squeezing with enough force to make Trent wince and buckle at the knees. Listen closely, Reese whispers, leaning in so their faces are inches apart. If you ever approach her again, if you ever say her name, if you even think about her too loudly, I will dismantle your life piece by piece until there is nothing left but dust. Do we understand each other? Trent nods frantically, pale and sweating. Good. Now get out of my sight. Reese releases him, and Trent scrambles away, fleeing the gallery like a rat scuttling for cover. The room is silent around them, people staring, but Reese doesn't care. He turns to Nadia, his eyes searching hers, the violence in them fading into concern. Are you all right? He asks, his thumb brushing her cheek. I'm fine, Nadia breathes, her heart racing. But it isn't fear. It is adrenaline. It is the realization that for the first time in her life, she isn't the one running away. She looks at Reese, at the hard lines of his face, the scar on his brow, the darkness in his eyes, and she feels a pull so strong it terrifies her. He is a monster, yes, but he is her monster. Thank you, she whispers. Reese shakes his head, his hand lingering on her face. You don't thank me for protecting you, Nadia. It is my job. It is my privilege. He offers her his arm. Come, let's go home. And as they walk out into the cool night air, the paparazzi cameras flashing, Nadia realizes with a jolt that she isn't acting anymore. She isn't just playing the part of the fiancé. She is starting to believe it. The weeks blur into a routine of high-stakes tension and quiet intimacy. They fall into a rhythm. Breakfast on the balcony, evenings spent in his study where she reads while he works. They are careful not to touch when they are alone, adhering to the rules of the contract, but the air between them grows thicker, charged with an unsaid desire. One night, a thunderstorm rages over the city, shaking the glass walls of the penthouse. Nadia, unable to sleep, wanders into the living room to find Reese standing by the window, a glass of whiskey in his hand, watching the lightning. He is shirtless, and for the first time she sees the roadmap of violence etched onto his skin. Scars crisscross his back, old wounds from a life she can only imagine. He looks lonely, achingly, devastatingly lonely. She shouldn't approach him. The contract says no touching, but the thunder cracks, loud and violent, and he flinches. Just a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. It breaks her heart. She walks over to him, her bare feet silent on the floor. Reese, she says softly. He turns startled, his eyes wide and unguarded for a split second. He looks at her, in her silk robe, and the glass in his hand tilts dangerously. You shouldn't be here, Nadia, he says, his voice rough with sleep and whiskey. Go back to bed. She shakes her head, stepping closer. You're bleeding, she whispers, pointing to his hand. He had gripped the glass so hard it shattered in his palm, a shard slicing his skin. He looks down, as if realizing it for the first time. It's nothing, he mutters, turning away. Let me see, she insists, reaching out to take his hand. He tries to pull away, but she holds firm. She leads him to the sofa, sitting him down, and goes to fetch the first aid kit she knows he keeps in the bathroom. When she returns, he is sitting with his head in his hands. She kneels between his legs, taking his injured hand in hers. It is a large hand, capable of violence, yet now it rests passively in hers. She cleans the cut with antiseptic, feeling his muscles tense. Why do you do this? She asks quietly, bandaging the wound. Why do you carry the weight of the world alone? Reese looks at her, his eyes intense. Because if I share the weight, it might crush someone else. And I have seen enough people crushed. Nadia looks up at him, her hand still holding his. You don't have to protect everyone, Reese. Sometimes you need someone to protect you. The silence that follows is heavy, screaming with the truth they are both too afraid to speak. Rhys leans forward, his face inches from hers. And who is going to protect me, Nadia? You? He isn't mocking her. He is asking with genuine curiosity. Yes, she answers fiercely. If I have to. Rhys stares at her, his gaze dropping to her lips, then back to her eyes. You are a dangerous woman, Nadia Ashford, he murmurs. You make me want things I cannot have. He pulls his hand away slowly, standing up. Go to bed, he says again, but his voice lacks the command it usually carries. It sounds like a plea. The midpoint of their arrangement arrives with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Rhys has to travel to Chicago for a business meeting that involves the rival families. He leaves, Nadia with Kyle and a team of guards promising to be back in 2 days. The penthouse feels empty without him, cold and lifeless. On the second day, Nadia receives a package. There is no return address. She opens it to find a black velvet box. Inside is a necklace, a diamond choker that must cost a fortune. But underneath the velvet is a note written in red ink. The wolf is away. The sheep are left to slaughter. Meet me at the docks at midnight if you want to keep your pretty face. It isn't signed. Panic, cold and sharp, pierces her chest. She shows the note to Cale immediately. Cale's face goes pale. He pulls out his phone, dialing Rhys. It goes straight to voicemail. Boss is dark, Cale says, his voice tight. We can't reach him. This is a trap, Miss Nadia. We lock down. We don't go anywhere. But Nadia's phone buzzes, a text message, an image. It's a photo of her mother's house in the suburbs. A man is standing on the porch. The text reads, come alone, or we pay Mommy a visit. The world stops. She can't risk her mother. She can't wait for Rhys. She has to act. She looks at Kyle, who is busy securing the perimeter. She grabs her coat, slips out the service entrance, and runs. She knows it's stupid. She knows it's exactly what Rhys told her not to do. But she loves her mother. And deep down, she prays that Rhys is the man she thinks he is. That he will know. That he will come. The docks are shrouded in fog, the smell of brine and diesel fuel thick in the air. Nadia walks toward the designated warehouse, her heart beating like a trapped bird against her ribs. She enters the cavernous space, shadows dancing along the walls. Hello? She calls out, her voice echoing. A figure steps out from behind a shipping container. It isn't the Valenti family. It isn't a rival mob boss. It is Chloe. And beside her, holding a gun, is Trent. The absurdity of it almost makes Nadia laugh. It's them? Her ex and her ex-best friend are the ones threatening her? You? She asks, incredulous. Trent steps forward, the gun shaking in his hand. You ruined everything, Nadia. You and your psycho boyfriend destroyed my career. I have nothing, Chloe smirks, smoking a cigarette. We figure if we ransom you, your boyfriend will pay up. A few million to get his pet back. Nadia stares at them, pity replacing the fear. You are idiots, she says calmly. You have no idea who you are dealing with. He isn't going to pay you. He's going to kill you. Trent laughs nervously. He's in Chicago. We checked. We have time. But as the words leave his mouth, a sound tears through the warehouse, the sound of a heavy metal door being kicked off its hinges. Footsteps thunder on the concrete, fast, heavy, terrifying. Trent spins around, raising the gun, but he is too slow. A shadow moves through the fog, a blur of motion. A gunshot rings out, not from Trent. Trent screams, dropping his gun as a bullet tears through his hand. Rhys Sterling steps into the light. He isn't wearing a suit. He is wearing tactical gear, his face streaked with grime, eyes burning with a demon's rage. He didn't go to Chicago. He never left. Rhys moves with a lethality that is almost beautiful to watch, a blur of calculated violence that closes the distance between them in a heartbeat. He kicks the gun away from Trent's whimpering form, the sound of metal skittering across concrete, echoing in the vast, terrified silence of the warehouse. Chloe screams, shrinking back against the rusted shipping container, her bravado evaporating instantly in the face of true, unbridled danger. Reese doesn't even look at her. His entire focus is locked on Trent, his boot pressing down on the man's uninjured hand, pinning him to the filthy floor. "I told you," Reese growls, his voice a low rumble that vibrates in Nadia's chest. "That she was mine. You didn't listen." He applies pressure, and Trent's scream tears through the air, raw and pathetic. Nadia watches, her breath caught in her throat, paralyzed not by fear of Reese, but by the sheer intensity of his protection. Reese finally looks up, his eyes finding Nadia across the dim space, and the demon in his gaze softens instantly into something agonizingly human. He steps off Trent, ignoring the man sobbing, and strides toward her, holstering his weapon with a fluid motion. He reaches her, his hands hovering for a split second, as if afraid she might break, before he pulls her into him, crushing her against the hard, tactical vest. "I've got you," he breathes into her hair, his voice cracking. "I'm here. You're safe." Nadia clings to him, her fingers digging into the straps of his gear, the smell of gunpowder and his unique scent, sandalwood and rain, flooding her senses. She buries her face in his neck, the adrenaline crash hitting her all at once, shaking her to her core. For the first time in her life, she realizes that safety isn't a place. It is a person. He pulls back just enough to frame her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away the tears she didn't realize were falling. "Did they hurt you?" he demands, his eyes scanning her frantically for bruises. "If they touched you—" "I'm okay," she manages to whisper, though her voice trembles. "You came." Reese closes his eyes for a moment, resting his forehead against hers, breathing in the fact that she is alive. "I never left, Nadia. I was tracking the Valenti movement. I knew they would try to use you. I was waiting for them to make a move so I could end it." He opens his eyes, and the ice is back, cold and sharp. "And now it ends." He turns back to Trent and Chloe, his arm wrapping around Nadia's waist, locking her to his side. "Kale," he barks into the shadows. Kale and 3 other men materialize from the darkness of the warehouse entrance, their movements silent and professional. "Secure them," Reese orders, gesturing to the pathetic couple cowering by the container. "Load them into the second car. We're taking a drive." Chloe starts to cry, babbling apologies, but Reese ignores her completely. He guides Nadia toward the exit, his body shielding hers from the sight of her ex-boyfriend being hauled up by his collar. As they step out into the cool night air, the fog swirling around the docks, Nadia looks up at him. "Where are we going?" she asks. Reese opens the door of a waiting armored SUV, helping her inside with gentle hands. "To finish this," he says simply, "so you never have to look over your shoulder again." The drive is silent, the city lights blurring past the tinted windows like streaks of neon paint. Reese holds her hand the entire time, his grip tight, his thumb tracing soothing circles on her knuckles. They arrive not at the penthouse, but at a private airstrip on the outskirts of the city. A sleek black jet sits on the tarmac, engines idling. Kale's car pulls up behind them. Reese leads her out, the wind whipping her hair around her face. "What is this?" she asks, confusion warring with exhaustion. "We aren't going on the plane," Reese says, guiding her toward a hangar. They are. He nods toward Trent and Chloe, who are being marched toward the jet by the security team. "I'm sending them away, Nadia. Far away, to a place where they can't climb ladders or ruin lives." They stop at the edge of the tarmac. Reese turns to face her, blocking the view of the jet. "I could have killed them," he admits, his voice low and honest. "A part of me wanted to, but death is too easy, and I don't want that blood on my conscience when I hold you." He looks over his shoulder as the jet stairs retract. They are going to a facility in Southeast Asia, a very secure, very remote facility run by an associate of mine. They will work. They will have simple lives, but they will never set foot in this country or in your life again. Nadia watches the plane begin to taxi, the roar of the engines drowning out the city sounds. It is a punishment worse than prison for people like Trent and Chloe. Irrelevance. Exile. She looks at Reese, seeing the mercy hidden beneath the ruthlessness. "Thank you," she whispers. The ride back to the penthouse is different. The tension of danger has evaporated, replaced by a thick, heavy awareness of what comes next. The contract is over. The threat is gone. Trent is gone. There's no reason for them to be together anymore. The thought makes Nadia's chest ache with a physical pain. When they enter the apartment, it feels quiet, the panoramic view of the city mocking her with its beauty. Rhys dismisses the guards, locking the heavy door behind them. He turns to her, removing his tactical vest and tossing it onto a chair, revealing a black t-shirt that clings to his chest. He looks tired, but his eyes are burning with that same intensity she saw in the warehouse. "So," Nadia says, her voice small in the large room, I guess this is it. The deal is done." Rhys walks over to the wet bar, pouring 2 glasses of water instead of whiskey. He hands one. To her, his fingers brushing hers, the spark as electric as ever. "Is it?" he asks, leaning back against the counter, watching her. "You want to leave, Nadia?" She looks down at the water, watching the bubbles rise. "It's not about what I want, Rhys. It was a business arrangement. You needed a fiancé to secure your deal. I needed help." "The deal," Rhys interrupts, his voice dropping an octave, "was a lie." Nadia's head snaps up. "What?" He puts his glass down and walks toward her, stopping just inside her personal space. "There was no board pressure, no requirement for a wife. I run this city, Nadia. I don't answer to anyone about my personal life." Confusion knits her brow. Then why? Why go through all this? Why move me in, pay my debts, pretend? Rhys reaches out, his hand cupping her cheek, his thumb brushing her lower lip. "Because I saw your text," he confesses, a wry smile touching his lips. "All men are trash." It challenged me. And then I met you. You were so angry, so broken, yet so incredibly fierce. I wanted to know you, but I knew if I approached you as Rhys Sterling, the mob boss, you would run. So I created a scenario where you had to stay. He steps closer, his body heat radiating toward her. "I trapped you because I wanted to prove you wrong. I wanted to be the man who didn't let you down." Nadia stares at him, her heart pounding so hard she thinks he can hear it. "You manipulated me," she whispers, but there's no anger in her voice, only wonder. "Guilty," Rhys admits, his forehead resting against hers. "I am a selfish man, Nadia. I take what I want. And from the moment you walked into the Obsidian in that dress, looking like you wanted to burn the world down, I knew I wanted you." He pulls back slightly to look into her eyes, his expression vulnerable for the first time. "I don't want you to leave. I don't want a fake fiancé. I want the real thing. I want you waking up in my bed every morning. I want to argue with you about art. I want to protect you for the rest of my life." The walls she has built around her heart for years, the walls Trent reinforced brick by brick, crumble into dust. She looks at this dangerous, complicated, terrifyingly beautiful man and sees the truth. He didn't just save her life tonight. He saved her heart. "You're crazy," she says, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Certifiable." Rhys grins, a genuine, blinding smile that transforms his face. "Occupational hazard," he murmurs. "So? What do you say? Will you stay? Will you let me show you what a real man looks like every single day?" Nadia laughs, a sound of pure joy, and throws her arms around his neck. "Yes," she breathes against his lips. "Yes." His mouth crashes onto hers, and this time, there is no hesitation, no pulling back. It is a kiss of possession, of promise, of starving men finally feasting. He lifts her up, her legs wrapping around his waist, and carries her toward the bedroom, not breaking the kiss. The darkness of the room wraps around them, but for the first time, Nadia isn't afraid of the dark. She knows the monster in the shadows. He is hers. And as he lays her down on the bed, looking at her with a reverence that makes her soul ache, she knows that she was right. All men might be trash, but Rhys Sterling, he is the exception. He is the fire that burns the trash away. 6 months later, the city is covered in a blanket of pristine white snow. The Obsidian is closed to the public tonight. Inside, the air is warm, filled with the soft hum of a string quartet and the laughter of friends. It isn't a wedding, not yet, but a celebration. Nadia stands on the balcony, wrapped in a fur coat Reese insisted she wear, looking out at the frozen skyline. She feels a hand on her waist, warm and heavy. She leans back into Reese's chest, smiling. "Cold?" he asks, pressing a kiss to her temple. "No," she answers, turning in his arms. "Just thinking." About? About how wrong a drunk text can go, she teases, running her hand up his chest to adjust his tie. Reese chuckles, the sound rumbling through him. "I'd say it went exactly right." He catches her hand, bringing it to his lips to kiss her palm. "You know, I kept it," he says softly. "The text." Nadia raises an eyebrow. "You did not." He pulls his phone from his pocket, tapping the screen, and shows her. There it is, saved and pinned. "All men are trash." "I look at it every morning," Reese says, his eyes serious now, "to remind myself of the standard I have to beat." Nadia feels a lump in her throat. She reaches up, pulling his face down to hers. "You beat it, Reese," she whispers against his lips. "You shattered it." He smiles, kissing her deeply, the cold air around them forgotten in the heat of their love. "Good," he murmurs. "Now let's go inside. I believe I promised you a dance, and I never break a promise." They turn and walk back into the warmth, leaving the cold night behind them, together. The warmth of the private lounge inside the Obsidian wraps around Nadia like a second skin, a stark contrast to the biting wind of the balcony. The room is alive with the low hum of power. These aren't just party guests. They are the architects of the city's underground, men and women who move chess pieces with human lives. 6 months ago, walking into this room would have terrified her. She remembers the girl she was then, trembling in her thrifted dress, desperate, angry at a boy who didn't matter. Now she walks through the crowd with her hand tucked securely in the crook of Reese's arm, and she feels the shift in the atmosphere. Heads turn. Conversations lull slightly. They aren't looking at her with pity or dismissal anymore. They are looking at her with respect. She is no longer just the fiancée. She is the anchor that holds the storm of Reese Sterling in check. Reese guides her to a velvet booth in the corner, his body constantly angling to shield her from the main flow of traffic, a habit he hasn't broken, and one she suspects he never will. He signals for a drink without saying a word, his authority so absolute it doesn't require volume. As he sits, he exhales a long, slow breath, the tension of the room bleeding out of his shoulders only when he looks at her. "You are quiet," he observes, his hand finding hers on the dark leather seat, his thumb rubbing the pulse point of her wrist. "Regretting the public life?" Nadia smiles, shaking her head. "No, just remembering. It feels like a lifetime ago that I stood in that hallway, ready to pepper spray you." Reese laughs, a low vibration that she feels in her own chest. "I would have deserved it," he admits darkly. "I was arrogant. I thought I was buying a solution to a problem. I didn't know I was inviting my fate into the room." The waiter places a glass of sparkling water for her and a neat scotch for him. Reese lifts his glass, catching the amber light. "To fate," he murmurs, his gray eyes locking onto hers, "and to the chaos that brought us here." They drink, the silence between them comfortable, filled with a shared language of glances and touch. But the peace is interrupted by the approach of an older man, leaning heavily on a cane. It is Don Salvi, the man she met at that first terrifying lunch. He looks frailer now, but his eyes are still sharp as tacks. "Mrs. Sterling," he croaks, nodding respectfully. "Or soon to be, I hear." Nadia doesn't flinch. She offers him a smile that is polite but guarded. "Mr. Salvi, it is good to see you." The old man chuckles. "You have done the impossible, my dear. You have made a house a home. This city sleeps better knowing the wolf has a keeper." Reese stiffens slightly beside her, his protective instinct flaring. "Nadia is not my keeper, Salvi," he says, his voice dropping to that dangerous, velvet over steel tone. "She is my partner. There is a difference." Salvi raises his hands in mock surrender. Of course. No offense intended, Reese, only admiration." The old man shuffles away, disappearing into the crowd. Nadia squeezes Reese's hand. "Relax," she whispers. "He meant it as a compliment." Reese turns to her, his expression intense. "I don't care. I don't want you defined by me. You aren't just the woman who tamed the beast. You are the fire that keeps the beast alive." His words are heavy, laden with a vulnerability that he only ever shows her. It hits her then, the magnitude of what they have built. It isn't just a romance. It is a fortress. Later, after the guests have thinned out and the music has shifted to a slow, melancholic jazz, they take the elevator up to the penthouse. The transition from the public face of the Mafia boss to the private man is immediate. As the elevator doors slide open, Reese loosens his tie, pulling it from his collar with a sigh of relief. He walks straight to the sound system, switching off the house audio, leaving only the sound of the wind against the glass and the distant sirens of New York. He turns to her, and the look on his face stops her breath. It is a look of hunger, yes, but also of profound exhaustion. Not physical tiredness, but the soul-deep weariness of a man who has spent his life waiting for the other shoe to drop. "Come here," he says softly. It isn't a command. It is a need. Nadia walks to him, kicking off her heels as she goes, the cold marble cool against her bare feet. She steps into his arms and he folds around her immediately, burying his face in the crook of her neck. They sway there for a long time, not dancing, just holding each other in the quiet dark. "I love you," he whispers against her skin, the words vibrating through her. "I never thought I would say that to anyone. I thought it was a weakness, a crack in the armor." He pulls back to look at her, his hands framing her face. "But you make me stronger. You make me want to be a man who deserves this." Nadia reaches up, tracing the scar on his eyebrow with her thumb. "You are that man, Reese. You showed me. When everyone else left, when everyone else used me, you stood tall. You didn't just pay my debts or scare off Trent. You saw me, the real me." She pauses, her voice trembling slightly. "Do you remember the text? All men are trash?" Reese smiles, a ghost of a smile. Hard to forget. "I was wrong," she says fiercely. "Not all men. Just the ones who are afraid to be real. You are the most real thing I have ever known." Reese closes his eyes, leaning into her touch as if it is the only thing anchoring him to the earth. "Then I have succeeded," he murmurs. He scoops her up into his arms, carrying her toward the bedroom. The room is bathed in moonlight, the city spread out below them like a carpet of diamonds. He lays her down on the bed, hovering over her, his weight supported on his elbows. He looks at her for a long time, memorizing her face, as if he is afraid she might disappear if he blinks. "I have a gift for you," he says suddenly, sitting up and reaching into the drawer of the nightstand. He pulls out a small, leather-bound book. It looks old, the leather worn and cracked. He hands it to her. "What is this?" she asks, running her hand over the cover. "It was my father's journal," Reese says, his voice tight. "He wrote in it every day until he died. It contains the locations of every safe house, the numbers of every account, the secrets of every family in the council." Nadia freezes, holding the book like it is a grenade. "Reese, this is everything. This is your leverage, your safety." Reese nods. "It is the keys to the kingdom, Nadia, and I am giving it to you." He takes her hand, placing it flat against the cover of the book. "Because if anything happens to me, if I ever can't come for you, this will protect you better than any gun. With this, you can buy armies. You can destroy empires." Tears well up in her eyes. It is the ultimate gesture of trust. In a world where information is currency and paranoia is a survival skill, he is handing her his life. "I don't want it," she whispers. "I want you." "You have me," Reese vows, taking the book and placing it on the nightstand, then interlacing his fingers with hers. "Until my last breath, you have me. But I need to know that no matter what happens, you are safe. That is what a real man does, Nadia. He doesn't just fight for today. He plans for tomorrow he might not see." He kisses her then, a slow, deep kiss that tastes of forever. It is a promise sealed in the darkness. As they move together, the city watching silently through the glass, Nadia knows that the story isn't over. It is just beginning. They have survived the lies, the betrayal, and the violence. Now, they face the hardest challenge of all, living happily in a world that thrives on tragedy. But as Reese's arms tighten around her, pulling her flush against his heart, she knows they will make it. Because he is the storm, and she is the anchor, and together, they are unbreakable. The morning of the wedding feels less like a performance and more like a coronation. The chaotic noise of the city is muffled by the thick walls of the penthouse, replaced by the soft rustle of silk and the hushed whispers of the makeup team. Nadia stands before the floor-to-ceiling mirror, and for a moment, she doesn't recognize the woman staring back. It isn't just the dress, a custom masterpiece of French lace and structure that cost more than Trent's entire existence, but the eyes. The fear that used to live in them, the constant low-level hum of anxiety about rent and approval, is gone. In its place is a calm, steely assurance. She is no longer the girl who drunk texts out of desperation. She is the woman who commands the heart of the city's most dangerous man. Her mother, dressed in a gown she never could have afforded a year ago, stands behind her, tears streaming down her face. She doesn't ask if Nadia is sure. Everyone who sees them together knows there is no other option. They are inevitable. The ceremony is held in the private gardens of a historic estate, Reese bought just for the occasion, simply because Nadia mentioned she liked the hydrangeas there once. Security is tight, a ring of steel hidden beneath the floral arrangements, but inside the perimeter, it is a fairy tale. As the music swells, a string quartet playing a hauntingly beautiful version of a modern ballad, Nadia steps onto the aisle. The crowd is a sea of faces, politicians, business tycoons, and the shadowed figures of the underworld, all standing in reverence. But Nadia doesn't see them. Her vision tunnels to the end of the White Runner, where Reese waits. He is devastating in a tuxedo of midnight blue, his posture rigid, his hands clasped in front of him. When he sees her, the composure he wears like armor shatters. He takes a sharp, audible breath, his gray eyes shining with an emotion so raw, it feels like a physical touch from across the garden. Reaching him feels like coming home after a long war. He takes her hand, his grip, firm and grounding, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "You look," he starts, but his voice fails him. He shakes his head, a small, incredulous smile touching his lips. "You look like my future." The ceremony is short, the vows spoken not for the audience, but for each other. "I promise to protect you," Reese says, his voice ringing clear in the silence, "to be your shield when the world is cruel, and your sanctuary when it is loud. I promise to never let you question your worth. I promise to be the man who stays." Nadia squeezes his hand, her heart overflowing. "I promise to trust you," she whispers, "to stand in the fire with you and never burn, to love the monster and the man because they are both mine." When the officiant pronounces them husband and wife, Reese doesn't just kiss her, he claims her. He pulls her flush against him, dipping her slightly, and kisses her with a passion that makes the guests cheer and the old guard look away in embarrassment. It is a kiss of victory, a signal to the world that Nadia Ashford is under the ultimate protection and that Reese Sterling has found his ultimate weakness, which is also his greatest strength. As they walk back up the aisle, showered in white rose petals, Nadia catches a glimpse of a camera flashing. Tomorrow, this picture will be on every social media feed. Trent, wherever he is rotting in Southeast Asia, will see it. Chloe will see it. The world will see it. And they will know that the girl who was left behind is now the queen of the city. The reception is a blur of champagne, laughter, and dancing. But the moment that matters happens later, when they slip away from the party. Rhys leads her up to the roof of the estate, away from the noise. The night air is cool, but his jacket is already around her shoulders before she can shiver. They stand by the stone balustrade, looking out at the distant lights of the city that is now their kingdom. Rhys pulls her back against his chest, his arms wrapping around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Are you happy?" he asks, the question quiet and serious. Nadia leans her head back against him. "I didn't know happiness could feel this heavy," she admits. "It feels permanent." Rhys kisses her neck, a soft, lingering touch. "It is," he vows. "I made sure of it." He reaches into his pocket and pulls out his phone. He unlocks it and holds it up for her to see. The background hasn't changed. It is still that screenshot of her drunk text. "All men are trash," Nadia laughs, the sound bubbling up from her chest. "You have to delete that now, Rhys. It's false advertising." "I found a man who isn't," Rhys shakes his head, thumbing over the screen. "No, I'm keeping it. It reminds me of the work. It reminds me that trust is earned, not given, and that sometimes the best things in life come from a wrong number." He turns her around in his arms, the moonlight catching the silver band on his finger, a match to hers. He looks down at her, his expression softening into pure devotion. "You challenge me, Nadia," he whispers, tucking a stray curl behind her ear. "You demanded a real man. Every day for the rest of my life, I am going to make sure you never regret asking for one." Nadia reaches up, cupping his face, feeling the rough stubble against her palm. "You already have," she says softly. "You showed me. You saved me." Rhys shakes his head. "No, Tesoro. You saved me. You woke me up." He leans down, his forehead resting against hers, the two of them breathing the same air, sharing the same heartbeat. The city below them continues to spin, full of danger and noise and broken promises, but up here, in the circle of his arms, there is only peace. Did this story touch your heart? Let me know in the comments. More stories coming soon. Subscribe to never miss one. Nadia closes her eyes, breathing in the scent of sandalwood and rain, and smiles. She thinks of the girl crying in the dark apartment, holding a bottle of cheap wine, feeling like the world had ended. She wishes she could go back and whisper in her ear, "Just wait. He's coming, and he's going to burn the whole world down just to keep you warm." She opens her eyes and looks at her husband, the wolf who bowed only to her. "I love you," she says, and for the first time in her life, she knows the man listening will never, ever let her go. The end.